Welcome to Your Daily Detroit. I'm Jer Stays, coming to you from the Mackinac Policy Conference. It's Thursday, May 30th, 2019. Today, we're talking about the future and soul of Eastern Market with Dan Carmody. He leads the nonprofit Eastern Market Partnership. Dan has a crucial role in the organization that helps guide one of Detroit's most well-known and well-loved neighborhoods. We get into the vision for the area, the challenges it faces, and talk about the soul of this center of Detroit's food scene. That conversation is up right after this. Daily Detroit's Mackinac Island coverage is brought to you in part by Repurpose. That's where you can hire top tech talent in Detroit faster. Download their free startup salary report at repurpose.co, and of course, we'll have a link in the show notes. So it has been a pretty interesting few weeks for you.
It has.
and to deal with some of that, especially with what's all been going on in Eastern Market, I understand you've got some new programs coming in that are really interesting.
Yeah, so, this whole notion of a lot of investment coming at Eastern Market is something, we saw coming a few years ago. First of all, Eastern Market is really amazing that it's 128 years old. And it's amazing because we don't have any peers left around the country because most of them were eliminated by the same kind of investment wave that we're now embracing. So in many ways, Eastern Market's still there because of the failure of Detroit real estate for 50 or 60 years. It left it in place, kind of. Well, Eastern Market's also 128 years old because it's changed, not because it stayed the same. If it stayed the same, there would be it would have been irrelevant a long time ago. So, in the 12 years that Eastern Market that I've been at, people have given us the general community direction is don't change it, just make it better. So how you do that is kind of the really central question. And the fact that we have an investment wave coming at us is not entirely a bad thing because we got a lot of abandoned buildings. We still have a lot of vacant lots. There's still a lot more value to be derived. But how do we embrace that development wave without losing our soul in the process is kind of the central question. And so a few years ago, we really took it apart, put together a strategy plan, and we're quite proud of it, and that led to the city investing $800,000, $600,000 of their money and $200,000 from the Nature Conservancy. And they'll be unveiling a master plan based on our strategic plan later this summer. That master plan does two things. It expands the Eastern Market District to give us a chance to keep larger scaled food enterprise, food processing and distribution, which is really the heart of a food district. Wolverine Foods, for example, Wolverine Packing Company, had to expand or they would have had to have left the city, at least in part, because they only had one other alternative. And if they didn't double their production of fresh burger patties, they would have lost their contract they already had. The city, Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, worked hard to get them an 8-acre site. And they're the first tenant in what we call the Food Innovation Zone, which is a 100-acre or so expansion of the Eastern Market into the east and northeast of the current district. We're real proud of the plan that's taking shape because by combining stormwater management, you end up creating about 1.5 million square feet of space for food manufacturing and distribution that we think will be absorbed over the next 10 years. At the same time as we improve the quality of life for the 60 or 70 families that have stuck it out over 5 or 6 decades of disinvestment, watching their neighborhood blocks go from having 32 houses on it to 2 houses. So we couldn't expect developers to come into the historic part of Eastern Market District and limit their displacement if we didn't try to emulate the best behavior possible around trying to do new development while respecting what's there. And so we've tried to do that.
You mentioned the soul of Eastern Market. What do you view as the soul of Eastern Market?
Well, we think there are 3 things that since 1891 Eastern Market's been, and it's sustained itself despite the revolutions in the city around it or despite the revolutions in the food sector it serves. Number one, we're a place where people, particularly those with limited resources, go to start or grow their small business. Number two, we're about food. And number 3, we're a place where everybody, regardless of their income, race, walk of life, they feel welcome at the market. And we take pride in the fact that the market has spent our organizations have spent about $18 million fixing up the public market, making it nicer. At the same time, we've continued to make sure that everybody feels welcome. So you can't do that. I mean, being run down and dirty and isn't the end-all be-all of being authentic. And so the development protocols that we, as an organization, adopted last week and announced yesterday are basically criteria that we're going to let developers know on the front end. This is what we think are important if we want to keep those three characters, those core values, that soul of the market, if you will. And having the criteria is great, but putting them to work to make sure that we can kind of help build this environment that sustains those core values is really the critical part. So it's the first of 4 steps. We establish the criteria. Here are the things we want developers to consider. And here's where we disagree a little bit with the community benefits agreement process. Now, there's nothing wrong with community benefits agreement processes, but they come in typically towards the end of the design of the project rather than at the beginning of the project. We think it's far easier for a developer to incorporate a community's thoughts if they can let them know what they are up front. So when they're doing their 15 gabillion pro formas before they get to a final one.
I like gabillion. That's a good number.
Quintillion, gabillion. There's usually a lot of different iterations of a project before the one that finally makes it to the finish line. And so we think we're doing developers a service by letting them know on the front end, hey, here's what's important to the neighborhood.
In some ways, this kind of reminds me, if you think about communities that mandate certain ways that their downtowns get developed. And, Detroit is such a huge city. I'm really glad to see some programs like this that kind of make it a little bit better in scale, right? Because one size does not fit all. I live in the University District. What works there will not work in Eastern Market, for instance, or may not.
Exactly. And those neighborhoods aren't concerned about preserving food as a core value of their neighborhood. Processing and distribution, maybe restaurants. But.
One question I've always had, and somebody who's traveled quite a bit, I'm always fascinated by 7-day-a-week markets and 24-hour markets. Like if I think about when I visited Philadelphia and things like that.
Yeah, Reading Terminal's beautiful market.
Yeah. Could that be in the cards for Eastern Market down the line?
Maybe. It's not a high priority for us for a couple of different reasons. First of all, we still have hollowed out the center part of Detroit, and there's far less households than there are to serve the retail market than there once were, or that there are in Philadelphia or other places that have a 7-day-a-week service.
So there is still a pretty big gap in that retail need right now.
Not enough to serve a 7-day-a-week market. Moreover, we're more interested in the wholesale side of the business. We want to nurture those businesses that make food products and distribute them to grocers to sell. Not, while we think the Saturday market's great, and we've launched Tuesday and Sunday markets to kind of continue to build the retail base of Eastern Market. Keep in mind, we are an outlier amongst those 24/7 public markets you describe in other cities. Nearly all of them have 20 or 30 permanent vendors open 7 days or 6 days a week with permanent installations. We have no permanent vendors except for Mo the Shoe Guy. We serve between 600 and 700 independent small businesses that come, set up, sell, tear down, and leave. And that's a much different market than somebody that has a permanent market stall. So, and quite frankly, in the for-profit world these days, the concepts of market halls, which are basically glorified food courts, I
think of like the Detroit Shipping Company that just opened places like that.
There's hundreds of those around the country. There weren't any of them there 5 years ago. So that's a hot concept. And there's a real fine line between some of the newer public markets like Milwaukee's public market, which is just a really big version of a food hall. So to me, there are great Findlay Market in Cincinnati, West Side Market in Cleveland are both fabulous markets, but they're not serving hundreds of transient vendors like we are. And so it's a different thing. And the market neighborhood is a different thing than the market itself. And certainly with the older buildings we have to come up with a whole different set of criteria around the older part of Eastern Market than this new expansion area because they're entirely different physicality of those neighborhoods. A lot of those older buildings are smaller. Many of them are almost impossible to get into compliance with modern food safety laws with regard to any large-scale food production. Now, pieces of them could be incubator or accelerator spaces, and in fact, one of the projects we announced this week was our second accelerator, where we're converting 15,000 square feet of a space that used to be Metro Cold Storage into suites for as many as 8 emerging food businesses. Again, not necessarily retail food businesses, but people processing and producing value-added food products, whether it's ice cream or lemon pies or whatever it is. And those, we have over 200 of those businesses that sell it or want to sell at the market, and we think there's more than 400, maybe as many as 600 of those businesses in Metro Detroit. So those are the ones we're reaching out to try to grow them as wholesale businesses, to try to expand the food sector from the bottom up. At the same time, we try to keep the larger employers like Wolverine and Global Packing and Germax that are expanding from the top down. And so at the end of the day, we end up with maybe 5,000 jobs in the food distribution and processing space rather than 2,500 we currently have.
That was where I was going to kind of go next. Is it really strikes me with this path of development that you're outlining that it seems just naturally that there'd be a focus on jobs, and frankly, a lot of jobs, and a phrase that I used to hear in the past a lot, which is, jobs that are available for Detroiters, right? That have a good on-ramp.
We have spent 2 years, and I think why we got traction with the city of Detroit about our original strategy is that the food processing and distribution sector, among all the sectors of the economy, has the highest percentage of entry-level living wage jobs that don't require a high school diploma. And so, you can make $16 to $18 to $20 pretty quickly in fairly low-skilled food sector work. And so that is a profound on-ramp to increase labor force participation rates in the city. And so this year, recently, we also conducted our first workforce development pilot where we worked with Greenhorn Training Solutions, a workforce development organization that does training, and tried to give them specific download of what food sector companies need. And so Germac, Global Corned Beef, EW Global, and Wolverine Packing Company were our employers that participated along with us to develop a 3-week curriculum to get people really oriented to the skills they need to succeed in a food sector job. And we're now placing the first 15 people in those jobs over the next few weeks. So we see that as a start. We think that right now, the urgency, we've actually been working with 5 companies, Wolverine being one of them, whose needs to expand are more urgent than the timeline to complete the plan that the city is going to roll out. And so we have 5 sites identified. We've been working as a nonprofit to assemble sites. The land bank owns a lot of property in the area. We wouldn't be having a conversation if that weren't the case. But as you know, as we've talked about with the Chrysler plant, there's lots of speculators that go in and buy a few parcels here and there that somebody's got to take out. And this isn't a big enough project. This isn't necessarily a FCA scale job. So we've been doing that for the last 2 years. And working alongside Detroit Economic Growth, working alongside the land bank, we now have 4 sites, and we're able, we think, the ability to get 4 other companies besides Wolverine in the ground yet this year, first part of next. And those total 5 companies represent almost 500,000 square feet of new space and somewhere between 350 and 400 jobs.
The one thing I noticed when going through the materials is that there is a name change from Eastern Market Corporation to Eastern Market, Partnership. And that really is very illustrative in what you're talking about.
So much of the work we do is so big that we can't do it by ourselves. So we have to figure out creative partnerships to leverage resources to get it done. We actually created our own nonprofit real estate development subsidiary to be able to be another tool to help for-profit developers meet our goals. So, for example, if a developer is trying to set aside 10% of their space in their new commercial building for more affordable rents for commercial tenants, maybe we participating in the project can find a low-cost or grant source of capital that can go into the project to help them reduce their costs on the front end so they can more easily provide that discounted space on the back end. We're happy to do that. But again, Eastern Market Partnership describes the work of 2 organizations, Eastern Market Corporation, Eastern Market Development Corporation, that will continue as legal entities. It's just the umbrella under which we work as Eastern Market Partnership, and I think it helps us focus on building a culture of partnership where I think we're pretty strong at that already. But I think partnerships are hard work, but we're committed to making sure that we have a stronger set of partners and partnerships in the future to defend these core values, which can be done, but not without the work of a lot of people.
Well, Dan Carmody, thank you so much for stopping by and sharing so much about what's happening in one of the most beloved places of our region.
For us, it's a real responsibility. We when we've done planning processes, people come out of the woodworks to tell us what they want about it, what they like, what they don't like, what they want to see happen. The fact is that everybody thinks about Eastern Market a little bit differently, but everybody has it in their heart, and we want to make sure to the extent possible we can keep it in the hearts of a lot of people in Detroit.
So here's a couple other things you should know today. Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan announced a plan to make the city free of blight by 2024. During his keynote speech here on Mackinac, Duggan says he'll ask voters next spring to approve issuing $200 million in bonds to finish demolishing what he says are 18,000 blighted homes. Because revenues have been higher than anticipated, Duggan says the city has paid down enough debt that it could sell the bonds without needing to raise taxes. The city council would first need to approve the plan before it goes before voters. Duggan says he hopes it could be on the ballot next March. Governor Gretchen Whitmer, leaders from the Michigan House and Senate, and officials from Detroit and around the state gathered on the big porch at the Grand Hotel this morning to sign a bill into law for auto insurance reform. Senate Bill 1, signed today, stops the use of gender, marital status, home ownership, occupation, and zip codes for setting rates. It also stops use of credit scores, but it doesn't stop the use of credit reports. And location still matters, as yet-to-be-defined territories replace zip codes. It also allows policyholders to choose their level of personal injury protection coverage, lowering a portion of the rates. It guarantees rate decreases for 8 years. But the devil is in the details. I did some math, and you can see how Detroit will still have the costliest car insurance, and Michigan the second highest in America, up on dailydetroit.com. Although hailed as historic by some, and it is as far as bipartisan cooperation around here, this looks more like a deal on the edges of the issue, and not a comprehensive reform. And we're done for today. I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and we'll see you around Detroit.
You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.